August 14th, 1945, 7 p.m. Eastern Victory Time. August 14th, 1945, 1 minute earlier. 6:59 Eastern Wartime. Wartime. The world was still at war. This was the war which Adolf Hitler had promised would determine the course of our civilization for 1,000 years to come. This was the war our Japanese enemies had pledged themselves to fight, if necessary, for a full century. Only 1 year ago, in August of 1944, there was very little reason to believe that the Japanese statement must necessarily be false. This was the Japanese Empire 1 year ago, cutting across Asia, spreading over the Netherlands East Indies, encompassing New Guinea, the Marshalls, the Philippines. 1 year ago in the Pacific, Allied advance was still slow and bitterly contested. In the Marianas, New Guinea, Myitkyina, we had scored success. But in China, the Jap was girding for a new and powerful offensive. In the Pacific, the GI's plaintive slogan was still, "The Golden Gate in 48." In Europe, too, victory seemed far distant. On both southern and western fronts, the Allied forces were faced with a stalemate. In Italy, the Germans held along the Arno line, and 2 months after D-Day, our invasion armies were still contained in Normandy. From the combat camera film records of the Army Air Force's Weekly Digest comes the story of the breaking of that stalemate. It begins in southern France, August 15th, 1944.
Before dawn on the 15th, troop-carrying C-47s passed over the invasion fleet as they neared the drop zones east of Toulon. This was a triamphibious operation, in all phases of which air power played a dominant role. Mission for these men, veterans of Africa, Sicily, Salerno, Burma, and Normandy, was to isolate the invasion area between Toulon and Cannes, clearing the way for seaborne troops of the United States 7th Army, who were to drive north and effect a juncture with 3rd Army troops driving from the west. Objective of this strategy was total destruction of all German forces operating in France. Meanwhile, Allied fighters had been ranging through all of France, making certain that Luftwaffe remnants would not be able to impede Allied tactical timetables. Expert ground strafing carried out prior to the invasion showed amazing results. Total casualties inflicted on landing forces by enemy air action consisted of a single landing craft, bombed but later beat. By D+2, as seaborne and airborne forces made contact and prepared to drive inland, every type of plane in the Allied tactical catalog swept in a wide arc around the outside of the invasion perimeter and northwest up the Rhone River Valley, giving the enemy no rest, creating an area in which nothing could move unless the Allies willed it.
bridge and rail bombing, which had prevented the enemy's escape, had not been without cost. But the Battle of France was over, and we had won it. The battle for Germany could now begin. Spearheading the struggle for Germany were the bombers of the U.S. Strategic Air Force. Blockbusters rained on Berlin in a round-the-clock attack program, with RAF planes carrying the ball in consecutive night raids for months on end. Pathfinder bombing techniques were developed to pinpoint explosives against targets vital to the enemy's ability to resist. High explosives ripped up rail lines and marshalling yards, paralyzed the Nazis' ability to move his troops where they were needed. Allied air power struck at aircraft and munitions factories, at steel and chemical plants, at refineries, harbors, synthetic industries. As advancing Allied troops narrowed the Nazi sphere in Europe, Allied bombs were crippling fascist Germany, methodically, thoroughly, destroying the enemy's will and ability to fight.
This was Berlin, world's third largest city, the political and industrial nerve center of the Nazi state. This city, focal point of Nazi culture, was the single most important source of munitions for the Wehrmacht. Brabag synthetic oil plant near Zeitz. The campaign against German oil had proved catastrophic to Nazi hopes. This is the Messerschmitt plant at Augsburg as it looked on 9 May 1945, the day Germany surrendered.
While Germany was being pounded into defeat, the struggle in the Pacific had taken on accelerated tempo. But a year ago, to battle-weary airmen prodding at Japan's perimeter, war's end seemed a long way off. Superforts, operating from India bases, joined the battle, adding their far reach to the liberators, mediums, and fighters, ranging out over Southeast Asia, smashing at Jap supplies, transports, communications, developing operational techniques that would later be used to level the Jap homeland. At Singapore, the Superfort struck hard and repeatedly. The largest, best-equipped naval base in the South Seas area, Singapore's destruction was vital to Allied hopes for reinforcing our Chinese allies from the sea. And in China, our help was sorely needed.
In September 1944, Jap armies driving to cut China in two converged on Guilin, forcing American and Chinese evacuation. From this base, laboriously built and equipped at a cost of $70 million, the 14th Air Force had damaged over 1 million tons of Jap shipping. As evacuation became inevitable, demolition crews prepared to destroy everything that might be useful to the Jap. Burned out buildings and bomb-pocked runways were all the enemy would find. Underfed, ill-equipped Chinese troops continued to retreat. And as the Jap moved in, this scene was repeated at Luzhou, Hengyang, Tanchuk, Dushan, Baoqing. But from airfields deeper in south-central China, the 14th Air Force threw its remaining strength at the enemy, harrying his advance, hacking at his supply lines and installations such as these at Hong Kong's Kowloon docks.
In the Pacific, though, we were moving forward. Our Army, Navy, and Marines had fought north to seize new islands, new footholds nearer the Jap homeland. Here on Saipan, Air Force engineers had worked day and night to build a base for superforts. On 12th October 1944, the first B-29s arrived at Saipan, and our island-hopping strategy was ready to pay off. We had moved a great striking power closer to Japan than ever before. Saipan, with its 10,000-foot runways, could be equipped with enough bombs, fuel, and maintenance facilities to carry on a full-scale attack program. Ready to begin the attack, Brigadier General Hansel, CO of the new 21st Bomber Command, addressed ground crews.
Well, the first element of the 21st Bomber Command has arrived. When we've done some more fighting, we'll do some more talking. Thank you.
From Saipan, 7th Air Force Liberators struck at Iwo Jima. Iwo was desperately needed as an advanced base from which fighters could escort superforts striking against Japan, and as an emergency base on which B-29s returning from these strikes could land. On 17 February 1945, Iwo Jima was taken. 4 weeks after the American flag had been raised, Marine patrols continued to dig Japs from their holes. The battle for this island had been long, bitter, and costly. But with Iwo in our hands, we were only 650 air miles from Japan. For air crews of flak-damaged bombers, Iwo meant a chance to fly and fight again.
Focal point for Allied planners during all this time was the Philippines, and ceaseless attacks had been carried out to soften the islands for our impending invasion. With the Philippines in our possession, we could cut off Jap war industry from rich raw material sources in the Netherlands East Indies and in Malaya.
Concentrated raids like this one on Cebu helped smash enemy supply, dock, and barracks areas and reduced his ability to counter our invasion. Airdromes such as Legazpi and Luzon were also targets. With these drives, the Far Eastern Air Force began its campaign to neutralize bypassed enemy bases. At Cotabato on Mindanao, second largest of the Philippine Islands, B-25s, skimming in at treetop level, scattered parafrags through enemy positions. Morotai-based mediums struck Siasi in the Sulu Island group south of Mindanao. Low-level strafing and parafrag attacks proved most effective for rooting Japs out of dense jungle. Hill by hill, the Philippines were being taken by superb air-ground coordination. Ground observers radioed directions to attacking A-20s, and pinpoint accuracy was attained in blasting the enemy from his dug-in position. On January 4th, 1945, Angawa-based 7th Air Force heavies hit Clark Field as part of the plan to neutralize Jap airfields. This prize target was the toughest we had yet attacked in the entire southwest and central Pacific. Though not seen in these pictures, ack-ack and phosphorus shells were extremely heavy. But most bombs were centered in the target area, rendering it permanently useless to the Jap. Other Jap-held airfields in the Philippines caught their share of Allied bombs. Combined with these attacks were heavy strikes by carrier planes and superforts of the 20th Bomber Command against staging bases and supply depots on Formosa, the Ryukyus, and along the coast of China to prevent Jap air reinforcement of the Philippines. On February 1st, liberators took off from Angaur in the Palaos. Their target, Corregidor. For the next 2 weeks, the attack mounted in intensity, and naval guns joined in to blast the island fortress. Then, at dawn on the 16th, C-47s flew in, loaded with paratroops.
In 24 hours, Manila Bay was open to Allied ships. What had taken the Japs 4 months to do, we had accomplished in 3 weeks. We had come back to Corregidor. By our victory in the hard-fought Philippines campaign, we had crumbled the Japs' outer defenses, and were now in a position to begin the attack on the inner fortress. The war was closing in on Japan, but the price we were paying was heavy. This American pilot died in his burning plane. He was still conscious after the crash, but his burnt fingers couldn't open his safety belt. This bomber had just smashed a railway bridge, had turned homeward, when caught by a full burst of heavy flak. The shell exploded after it was inside the bomber. The bomber made it home, but some of the crew didn't. This B-29 was caught on the ground by a Jap night raider over Saipan. This superfort had been on a long-range mission, had run low on fuel, and was forced to crash within sight of its own runways. 3 of its crew were killed. The bodies were brought up, comrades with whom they had flown in battle.
As the war moved steadily northward, bombing and strafing devastated Formosa's seaports, aerodromes, railroads, hydroelectric plants, and refineries. Formosa, once a strategic island, was blasted into a state of impotence. Smashing a Jap aircraft production on January 19, 1945, B-29s rocked Akashi, vital point in the Osaka industrial area. The Kawasaki plant, producer of aircraft engines, was practically obliterated. In a daylight strike, Superforts hit Tokyo on February 19th. Kobe, Japan's #1 shipbuilding center, was attacked on 11th April. 465 tons of bombs knocked out the Kawanishi seaplane plant. On May 14th, almost 500 Superforts hit Nagoya, Japan's third largest manufacturing center, producer of 35% of Jap aircraft engines. By July, our raids reached top intensity. Kagoshima's marshalling yards were turned into a holocaust of smoke and flame.
On April 1st, 1945, the Allies struck to take Okinawa. The Jap fought back savagely, suicidally. To the enemy, the loss of this inner island bastion would be the most serious blow the war had yet presented, threatening him with isolation from the China mainland, smashing his last hope for defending the Jap home islands against invasion. The capture of Okinawa would mean that we could fly from air bases only 325 miles from Japan. Realizing that fact, the Jap used everything he had to hold us off. It wasn't enough. After 2.5 months of combined operations, Okinawa was taken. The fight for this island had been as bloody as any in the war, but the iron ring around Japan was now complete. Naha, longest of Okinawa's airstrips, had been an operational base for hundreds of Jap bombers and fighters, the oldest and best developed aerodrome in the Ryukyu defense system. These were Naha's 2 main hangars. Even the hangar latrines were tile inlaid. The Jap had built Naha to last a long time.
In a desperate sneak attempt, 12 Jap planes attacked U.S.-occupied Yontan Airfield on Okinawa. Our night fighters and anti-aircraft accounted for 11 of the attacking planes. But one sally belly-landed, carrying troops well-equipped for demolition. These raiders operated for 2 hours, then committed suicide. Main damage to several of our transports and fighters was from sabotage rather than air attack. But on June 25th, Jap Imperial Headquarters admitted the loss of Okinawa.
This forward base now made it possible to strike the Jap and China mainlands at will. Confronting the Jap as our Air Force moved in for the kill were the most powerful weapons the world has ever seen.
The A-26, fast, heavily gunned attack bomber. The P-61, night fighter. The B-32 Dominator, giant twin of the B-29 Superfort. The jet-propelled P-80, the Shooting Star, flying at a velocity approaching the speed of sound. Those were just a few of the aircraft poised on Okinawa.
And 9,000 miles away, in the American homeland, hidden behind the walls of huge new factories, conceived by the finest scientific minds of the democratic world, and brought to life by hundreds of thousands of American workers, was the most closely guarded secret in the history of mankind. August 14, 1945. The war was over. But in the words of General Arnold, commanding general of the United States Army Air Forces, the war against the Axis is over. And yet we have two missions to fulfill. To maintain order and safeguard the accomplishments of victory, it will be necessary that adequate numbers of AAF personnel continue to serve in the occupation and other forces. And further in the future, the AAF must recognize its responsibilities as an effective instrument of peace. This is a challenge that I know the AAF will accept, not as a duty, but as a privilege. The wings of victory are yours. Wear them proudly.